On the afternoon of October 15, 1987, gunfire erupted in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. Inside a meeting of the country's revolutionary leadership, Thomas Sankara was killed. He was only 37 years old. 12 other people were killed with him. And the man who would take power after his death was not a foreign invader. It was his former friend, his former comrade in arms, and one of the men who had helped bring him to power. His name was Blaise Compaoré. But 4 years earlier, almost nobody could have predicted how far Sankara would go. In 1983, he was a 33-year-old army captain in a country then called Upper Volta. It was one of the poorest countries in the world. And Sankara believed poverty was not simply a natural condition. He believed it was connected to colonialism, political corruption, and Africa's economic dependence on foreign powers. On August 4, 1983, Sankara came to power through a military coup. But he did not present the takeover as an ordinary change of government. He called it a revolution. And he wanted ordinary people to participate in it. Thomas Isidore Noel Sankara was born on December 21, 1949, in Yoko, in what was then French Upper Volta. He came from a Catholic family and initially faced pressure to become a priest. Instead, he chose the military. His military career took him outside his country. In Madagascar, as a young officer, he witnessed a popular uprising that challenged the government. In France, he encountered left-wing political ideas. And back home, he became increasingly critical of the political system around him. He was not simply interested in becoming another military ruler. He wanted to change the relationship between the state and the people. In 1983, his opportunity came. Sankara became president. And within a year, he made one of his most symbolic decisions. Upper Volta would no longer be called Upper Volta. The country would become Burkina Faso. The name combined words from two major local languages and was intended to convey the idea of a country of upright or dignified people. The flag changed. The national anthem changed. And the revolution had a new identity. But Sankara knew that changing a name would not change people's lives. So the government began attacking problems that had existed for generations. Health was one of them. In 1984, the revolutionary government launched a huge vaccination campaign. Sankara later reported that 2.5 million children had been vaccinated against measles, meningitis, and yellow fever. The campaign became one of the most famous achievements associated with his government. Education was another battlefield. New schools were built. School fees were reduced. Literacy campaigns were launched in local languages. Between 1983 and 1986, school attendance increased significantly, although the education system also suffered serious problems after the government dismissed about 1,400 teachers during a confrontation with their union. The revolution was ambitious. But it was also disruptive. Sankara wanted to change the country's economy. He argued that Burkina Faso should produce more of what it consumed instead of depending heavily on imported goods and foreign assistance. The government promoted local agriculture. Land was redistributed. Local industries were encouraged. And Sankara became famous for wearing Faso Danfani, locally produced cotton cloth, while encouraging government officials to do the same. He was making a political statement. If Burkina Faso could produce the cotton, why should it send the raw material abroad and then buy back expensive finished products? His government also launched large public works projects. Villagers participated in building schools, health centers, wells, and reservoirs. A railway construction project became known as the Battle of the Rail. The revolution wanted development to come from the people themselves. But Sankara's revolution was not only about economics. It was also about women. He openly argued that a society could not call itself revolutionary while half its population remained oppressed. Women were appointed to government positions. Women entered professions and the military. His government banned female genital mutilation, forced marriage and polygamy. Sankara also encouraged women to participate directly in political life. For a conservative society in the 1980s, these were radical changes. He even made an unusual political statement by encouraging men to experience some of the realities traditionally placed on women. For Sankara, women's liberation was not a side issue. It was part of the revolution itself. And then there was the environment. Burkina Faso was suffering from drought, deforestation, and desertification. Sankara treated environmental destruction as a political problem. His government launched mass tree planting campaigns. Sankara stated that 10 million trees had been planted during the revolutionary period. The government also regulated firewood cutting and promoted improved cooking stoves to reduce pressure on forests. At the same time, Sankara attacked corruption. Government ministers were expected to live more modestly. Luxury official vehicles were sold. Officials were encouraged to travel in economy class. Sankara himself rejected the lifestyle associated with many African heads of state. But the revolution had another side. The government created People's Revolutionary Courts to prosecute corruption and other offenses. Some officials accused of corruption were publicly tried. But the courts did not operate according to the normal standards of a liberal justice system. Defendants could be denied legal counsel. Political opponents and critics could also be targeted. Trade unionists were arrested. Some civil servants were dismissed. The revolution promised power to the people. But it was still being imposed through a military-led revolutionary government. And eventually, the contradictions became harder to ignore. Sankara was preaching African unity while fighting regional governments he considered conservative. He was demanding economic independence while Burkina Faso remained one of the world's poorest countries. He was challenging foreign influence while his government itself depended on international relationships. And within the revolutionary leadership, disagreements were growing. At the center of the problem was Blaise Compaoré. Compaoré had been one of Sankara's closest allies. He had helped bring Sankara to power in 1983. But the relationship between the two men was becoming increasingly strained. Then, in July 1987, Sankara traveled to Addis Ababa for an Organization of African Unity Summit. There, he delivered one of the most famous speeches of his career. He spoke about Africa's foreign debt. His argument was simple and explosive. African countries, he argued, should unite and refuse to pay debts that he believed had become instruments of neocolonial control. He warned that if Burkina Faso stood alone, he might not survive. It was not a prophecy. It was a warning. Less than 3 months later, he was dead. On October 15, 1987, Sankara arrived for a meeting of the National Revolutionary Council in Ouagadougou. A group of armed men attacked the meeting. Sankara was killed. 12 of his colleagues were also killed. The coup brought Blaise Compaoré to power. And for the next 27 years, Sankara's name became a sensitive subject inside Burkina Faso. His legacy was not erased completely. But the full story of his assassination was suppressed. For decades, questions remained. Who ordered the killing? Why was Sankara killed? And did foreign governments play a role? There have long been suspicions about the involvement of France and other foreign actors. But this is where history needs caution. There is evidence of French hostility toward Sankara and continuing questions about the international context surrounding his death. But there is no definitive proof that France directly ordered his assassination. What is established is what happened inside Burkina Faso. In 2022, after a 6-month trial, a military court convicted Blaise Compaoré in absentia for complicity in the assassination. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. 2 other senior figures, Gilbert Diendera and Hyacinthe Kofando, also received life sentences. The court's verdict did not answer every question surrounding the assassination. But it formally established responsibility for the crime at the level of those convicted. And that changed the way the story could be told. Thomas Sankara was no longer simply a revolutionary whose death remained surrounded by official silence. He was the victim of a political assassination that had finally reached a courtroom. But perhaps the most remarkable part of Sankara's story is what happened after his death. The man who had ruled for only 4 years became more influential in death than many leaders who ruled for decades. His speeches continued to circulate. Young Africans began rediscovering his ideas about sovereignty, corruption, debt, women's rights, and African self-reliance. He became a symbol far beyond Burkina Faso. But Sankara should not be remembered as a perfect leader. He was a revolutionary who achieved remarkable things in a very short time. He was also a military ruler who restricted political freedoms and used institutions that did not always respect due process. Both realities can exist at the same time. That is what makes his story worth remembering. Thomas Sankara did not have decades to build his vision. He had 4 years. 4 years to rename a country. 4 years to launch mass vaccination and literacy campaigns. 4 years to push women's rights. 4 years to fight corruption. 4 years to challenge foreign economic dependence. 4 years to tell Africans that political independence meant little without economic independence. And then, on October 15, 1987, the revolution that he had helped create turned against him. He was 37 years old. His life ended with bullets. But his ideas did not. Today, Thomas Sankara remains one of the most recognizable symbols of radical African leadership. Not because everything he did succeeded. Not because his government was without flaws. But because he asked a question that continues to challenge African politics. What would happen if African countries stopped waiting for someone else to develop them? Sankara's answer was radical. Produce in Africa. Consume in Africa. Educate Africa. Defend Africa. And above all, believe that Africa could determine its own future. Thomas Sankara was killed in 1987. But almost 40 years later, his question is still alive. The revolution ended. The debate did not.